Alwyn, no apologies up to date, so we'll record that as so.
Excuse me, Chair, if I could just come in. Councillor Richard Griffiths has asked me to send his apologies, please. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Dylan. Anybody else being given apologies for us to record? Apparently not. Okay, go to item 2, declarations of interest. No. Okay, item 3, notice of urgent matters. I've just got one which will come up as part 2, and that is an update on the Chief Fire Officer recruitment. So we'll deal with that later. So now if we can go to the minutes of our last meeting, which for those of you who joined earlier, it's going back nearly, well, 12 months virtually to the day. So can I ask those that have got good memories whether they accept the minutes as a true record first? If you'd just like to raise your hand physically, we'll do. Thank you, Dylan. We have a seconder? Thank you. Again, if you'd just like to, for accuracy, record your agreement to the minutes. Thank you. Matters arising. I suspect that most of them you'll have had an update during the last 12 months, or they're part of potential agenda items later. Any officers got any matters arising they want to raise? No? Okay. Well, we'll move on to item 6, which is COVID-19 update. And I'm going to ask the Chief if he'll give us a report on that, please. Thank you.
Mr. Gaderi. Thank you, Chair. And good morning, members. It's nice to see you all again in executive panel mode. Looking at the minutes from the last meeting that we had, it does seem somewhat of a lifetime ago. And of course, the main thing that's been occupying our attention in that time has been the COVID-19 pandemic. And I have certainly through 2020 been in a position to brief you all in writing about the activities of the service. But now I think it's far more useful to be able to brief you in person about what we've been up to. So to take it in sort of fairly chronological order, we have continued throughout the pandemic to provide our operational service. So there has been, clearly there has been impact on our ability to provide the operational service. But throughout, we've been able to provide a service to the public, and we've been able to respond to emergencies in the way that we would hope to, in the way that they expect us to. In terms of our ability to respond to fire safety issues, you'll recall that we had to severely curtail the number of safe and well checks that we used to undertake, and there's an update on that later on in any event on today's agenda. But we continue to provide a fire safety service based around risk prioritisation. And as I say, that will come up later on in the agenda, I think. Staff absence, like every organisation, we haven't been able to escape entirely the impact of the virus on our staff members. We were fortunate, I think, in 2020 that we were able to enjoy very limited numbers of staff absence. Certainly, it never reached a level where we would, where we felt it was impacting on our ability to manage the service. Staff absence more recently has been somewhat higher, still not at a level which is causing us serious concern, but it's obviously something that we're continuing to monitor. We're still able to put fire appliances out on a daily basis, but we are monitoring the fact that there appears to be not just an increase in the number of people who are testing positive, but we are starting to note an increase in the number of people for whom the illness seems to be lasting longer than it did in the last in the outbreak in the spring and summer. I think this is called long COVID, as I understand it, and we have 1 or 2 people at the moment who we are concerned about who've been off now for far longer than we would have wanted or we would have expected. In terms of our assistance to other agencies, you will recall that throughout 2020, or certainly since the start of the pandemic in 2020, there was the issue of our potential to have staff members assisting the Wales Ambulance Service Trust. And in December, and I know someone will correct me if I've got this wrong, but I think it started in December, we were finally asked to provide people for deployment into driving ambulances. And since that date, we've been providing low numbers, probably something like 3 or 4 per week, low numbers of people who are assisting the ambulance service through driving ambulances for them. It's been pleasing to note that the cooperation that we've had with WAST over this has resulted in, for example, those members of the service who are helping WAST being vaccinated at the same time as WAST members were. And so although it did take some time to get off the ground, I think overall the collaboration that we've undertaken with the Ambulance Trust has been beneficial for both sides. More recently, we've been approached by through the PAN North Wales arrangements. We've been approached by the Health Board for assistance in the vaccination programme, and we are currently processing a request for a group of staff to be seconded to the programme in order to assist with the administrative arrangements. So what we're not talking about at the moment is people who are actually going to be doing the vaccinating. I'm aware that that's a possibility in some other fire and rescue authorities or fire and rescue services in the UK, but at the moment that's limited to assistance with the administration of that. But nevertheless, I think it's an indication again of the willingness of the service to become involved with the joint effort across the country. And I think it's another example of how the service can respond very quickly, and how we've got people who have a range of skills and abilities that they can actually come forward and assist this programme, which is perhaps the most vital thing on the agenda in the country at the moment. So that's broadly speaking, Chair, where we are with the COVID-19 effort, but I'm happy to take any questions from members.
Okay, well, I'll open to members. Nobody's raised their hand, so I don't know whether anybody has any questions for the Chief. No, obviously your updates over time have been well worthwhile, Chief. Right,
stunning people into silence is not normally what I do, but I'm grateful. Thank you.
Can we move on to item 7 then? That's performance monitoring, April to December 2020. I'll hand over to you, Sian.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Dwi am gyflwyno'r papur yma yn Gymraeg. Felly dwi'n gobeithio bod pawb yn gallu clywed.
I'm going to present this paper in Welsh, so I hope that everybody can hear the translation. Are you all able to hear the translation? Is that?
Dyma I ni adroddiad.
Thank you, Chair. This is the quarterly report for the operations and the performance in relation to improvement and well-being for the 9 months between April and December 2020. Rather than going through the summary and the recommendations and so on, if I can please refer you
to the
DICS, which is the monitoring report itself, and section 1, all the activities. This is an overview of the number of urgent activities. We've had 3,700 incidents attended over this 9-month period. Slightly less than half of those incidents were non-emergency calls, 1,770, and 39% of all the incidents were fires, and the others were non-fire events. So we call those the special service responses. If you look at the table at the bottom, you'll see how different the first quarter of this financial year was. The first full 3 months of the pandemic, wasn't it? And the lockdown, or the major lockdown as it's referred to. There were more fires, 654, more unnecessary calls, 627, and fewer, much fewer.
Ond mae ffigurau chwarter 1 I weld yn fwy gwahanol na'r arfer. Symud ymlaen wedyn I adran 2.
Special.
Dych chi'n sylwi yn y tabl.
Moving on to section 2 with regards in the table at the bottom of that page. The secondary fires were nearly 20% higher than in the first quarter of the previous year. And just to remind you as well, secondary fires, smaller fires, usually outside in the outdoors. If you can remember back to the first quarter, which feels very far back now, doesn't it? The lockdown period, we had more than usual number of people at home doing work around their home, burning rubbish, burning garden waste. Sometimes they were doing that because the recycling centres were closed. And some of those fires were the ones we saw going out of control, resulting in a call.
Symud ymlaen, os gael cyfeirio chi nesa at adran 3 ar dudalen nesa. Be sy'n sefyll allan o ran y prif dannau, hynny yw y tannau mwy neu tannau.
Either the person themselves or sometimes a neighbour could see that things were not going well. The number of fires that were set off and the accidentally started fires were lower as well. What's the explanation for that? One element is the reduction in the number of vehicle fires. That was quite a bit less than usual. But of course there were fewer vehicles on the road, which will probably explain the reduction in fires in vehicles. But also with regards to the intentionally set fires, I looked at the police figures for that first quarter, and the number of offences in North Wales was substantially lower. So it's interesting for me to see what the impact of the lockdown was on more than just the fire. That was a larger impact on society than the coronavirus itself. Going on then to section 4, unnecessary calls. If I can refer you to the table at the bottom of the page, what stands out is the ones that were genuine calls. They phoned 999 genuinely believing that there was an emergency and made an honest mistake, if you wish. 328 compared to 273 the previous year.
Sorry. Sorry, a minute.
Please excuse me. We notice that this happens when the number of secondary fires increases, the number of genuine calls, also people are more observant, maybe because they're at home more, don't want to risk not reporting something if they think it could possibly be a fire. Moving on now to section 5, special service incidents, not a fire, but an emergency such as road traffic collisions, flooding and so on. Once again, what stands out in the table is how many fewer road traffic collisions we had, especially during that first quarter. People were staying at home, obviously, and the roads were much quieter. Section 6. Just to make a quick comment in passing, if the service is called out to a road traffic collision, then instance where people need to be cut out of the vehicles has remained fairly consistent at about 40% of all. Then we turn to section 7 and turning to the well-being improvement, which is about keeping people safe in their homes. And of course, since the pandemic arrived, more people have been spending much more time at home than usual. And we had no way of knowing at the beginning of the pandemic what impact that would have on the number of fires in homes. For a period, there would be somebody at home every time a fire started. And I call those the persons reported ones. When the fire starts at home and somebody is at home, and that was true nearly every time during that part of the pandemic. And we didn't know either what impact being at home would have on people and the way they were living, because things had changed quite a bit. People had gone into a panic initially, had gone out buying more alcohol than usual. Shelves were getting emptied in the supermarkets, if you remember. Were they stocking up, or did they intend to drink more while they were at home? And what impact would that have on the risk of people being at home? Because we know that it's their behaviours that increase the risk of fires. As you can see in the table at the bottom of that page, we had 283 accidental fires in homes between April and December 2020. 15 more than during the same months the previous year. So only slightly more. Out of interest, I went to look at how that compared with, say, 10 years ago. And in 2010, we were attending about 20% accidental fires in homes than we are now. So despite the slightly small increase, the long-term trend still is a downward trend. Section 8, injuries are similar in the past 2 years. 72 and 69. Deaths this year for the final number will be published once we've had confirmation from the coroner about the cause of death, but at the moment we're recording 4 deaths. On then to section 9, healthy and safe inspections. So that's inspections carried out with people in their home. And of course that's changed quite a bit. Item 10 on today's agenda will cover this subject, so I won't go into detail here. Just to note the numbers and the percentages in the graph that you've got, which shows the high, medium and low risk and so on. And then finally, smoke alarms. As you know, the service and the authority does a lot of preventative work, not just through inspections in homes, but also through work in the community, in schools, sharing messages through social media and the traditional media and so on. We can't know exactly how many homes have got or haven't got a smoke alarm. There's no way of counting that. But every time we are called out to a house fire, or we record whether there was a smoke alarm in the property and whether it sounded or not. And what's disappointing, even though we've been doing this for years, for decades now, trying to make sure that people have got at least one smoke alarm in their property, we still come across some properties, some homes that haven't got one. This year, we found about 15 every month without a smoke alarm. A total of 47 homes during the first 3 quarters. So it shows how difficult it is to persuade some people to have a smoke alarm, but we'll keep at it. But this year, one of the symptoms of COVID-19 is loss of sense of smell. So if you were in a house and couldn't smell smoke and didn't have a smoke alarm, how easy it would be not to notice anything until the fire takes hold. So just to summarise, from April to December, the pandemic has contributed to a reduction in the number of fires in vehicles and road traffic collisions, a reduction in intentional fires, but an increase in the secondary fires and in the genuine calls that were not necessary. Even though it was slightly more the long-term trend continues to be a downward trend. The number of injuries hasn't increased and the number of deaths remains fairly low. And that I'll hand back to you, Mr. Chairman. And the recommendation is to note the content of the monitoring report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean, and thank Pippa too. I always think the presentation of these figures each quarter are the most interesting. And for me, I think, you know, in spite of the increase in the number of accidental fires, for instance, that the majority were confined to the room of origin, which I think, you know, shows the efficiency of the service. In terms of the smoke alarms and whatever, I think I'll make my comment at the paper that we're going to receive later. So I open it up at any questions, members for Sean? No? Oh, Marion?
Thank you, Chair. It's not really a question. I would just like at this juncture to pass on thanks for the quick response of the fire authority to the flooding in Mold. They were absolutely brilliant, and Mold Town Councillors would like me to pass on their thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger?
Thank you, Chair. We've did not safety check. 3,000 agency. My question is, what is meant by a partner agency?
Sean?
Apologies, Chair. I didn't quite catch Councillor Perry's.
Well, I know Roger's connection was breaking up. But the question was, what was the partner agency? And I think you answer that question for him.
Thank you. These are organisations where we have an agreement with them, if you like. They can take various forms, so that we don't classify organisations as a partner agency or not. These are arrangements that we have in place with certain other organisations, be they other public sector organisations, sometimes third sector voluntary organisations, or potentially even private ones. Whoever is best placed, by coming together and coming to an agreement, then we can quite often work together to protect the individual that we have in common. So for us, for example, if we have a county council that's working with people in the community, then they may refer those people on to us if they have some concerns, or there may be somebody that a voluntary agency might come across in the course of their work and feel that these people might be particularly vulnerable to fire, and they would wish to refer them on to us for a home safety check or safe and well check or some sort of work. So I think it's not the actual organisation that we label as such, but it's the nature of the relationship that we have with those, and we rely a lot on working together. And you'll no doubt be aware of that in other parts of your work as a county councillor, that there's a lot of interworking between organisations.
Okay.
Can I come back, Chair?
Yeah, go on.
Can I come back, Chair, please?
Yes, you can.
For example, my question is, when the fire service goes around properties and they fix smoke detectors, whatever, and if they come across concerns, do they actually contact social services?
Sean?
Most certainly we do, and there will be instances of safeguarding concerns, or there's all manner of different concerns. We work very closely with our colleagues in other parts of the public sector, and we would certainly, if we have concerns, then we would naturally refer on as necessary. We have all the data sharing protocols, under the Wales Accord. So we make those arrangements, not necessarily in every case, but where we think it's appropriate. We wouldn't want to leave people who we have identified as being vulnerable. We wouldn't want to just leave them. We would want to refer people on. Each one is different, of course. We wouldn't just do a sort of blanket referral. It would depend on the circumstances that we find people in.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Dylan, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions, actually. And thank you again, Sian, for your very comprehensive overview with your presentation. Overall, to me, the data reads very positively, but I'd like to home in on where there has been some increases. My first question relates to the 39% increase in accidental secondary fires, which you've highlighted. And the report talks about how small fires in gardens and loose rubbish during lockdowns contributed to this increase, which is thoroughly understandable. And my question is, what additional fire prevention publicity are we giving out to try and reduce those sort of fires? Thank you.
Quite right, and it was particularly in that first quarter, that's when the increase was particularly prevalent. And during that time, there was a lot of messaging going out through social media, through other media. This was about letting people know. There was a lot of activity at the time, and our corporate comms staff, had to pay tribute to them. At that time, they were exceedingly busy, and getting in touch with through social media. It's quite difficult, isn't it, when you are at home? You know, it's not the sort of thing where we could, under normal circumstances, we might visit a location, but this was a bit more done remotely. But there was a lot of effort at the time to get those messages through. And clearly by the second and third quarters, then it was less of an issue. But the secondary fires, as well as councillors will know, as members will know, there's a link to very much to the weather. And again, if we reflect back on long hot days of last May? I can't actually remember. It seems a long time ago. And therefore, when you put lots of things together, such as lots of people at home, some of the recycling centres, as I said, closed at the time, people tending to be a bit busier at home, and hot, dry weather, then all that does bring it all together. So I think it is that. I'm not sure if any other colleagues want to add anything more to that, but it was certainly a lot of emphasis on increasing our messaging, especially in social media and public messaging.
Thank you. You have a second question, Dylan?
Yes, please. Sian's also touched on the increase, or the small increase, in terms of accidental fires in dwellings. And looking at page 10 of the report, it talks about that those resulted in 19 people sustaining slight injuries. Sorry, my computer's just gone off. 2 sustaining serious injuries and 4 people losing their lives. And obviously it's accidental fires in dwellings that are more likely to cause injuries. Now, I noticed that Marion said earlier about the quick response in terms of the flooding, and I'm sure that there is a quick response in terms of accidental fires in dwellings. But my question is, I appreciate that we don't have target response times, but how can we be satisfied as an authority that we are having those quick response times to accidental fires in dwellings?
That's an excellent question, and it's something we have looked into recently. We've had a look at, in terms of availability or the responding from the station where one might normally think would be the first station to respond. As you'll appreciate, this is quite a complex area to explain in 2 dimensions. But looking back at the task group report several years ago, and more recently, right the way through, there is nothing that correlates between the degree of injury and the time taken. We've known for quite some time when that 999 call comes in, by that time, quite often, the fire can be quite well developed already. We had a look at that, and you're aware of the work that we did to look at the fire deaths, and that correlation. Quite often somebody will already have succumbed to the fire at the point of the 999 call. So we do look at the time taken to respond to every single incident of this nature. And if we see that there was any delay for whatever reason, then we'll have a look at that. But in terms of our control staff, the dynamic mobilizing, the making sure that there is coverage across the area is a constant round, and they are very expert at doing this. So we have had a look. So in terms, to answer your question more directly, we cannot see any correlation between that. The longer it takes, the greater the injury. There is simply no evidence to suggest that. We'll continue to look at that. And when we've got this past year, this whole year, we can have a look at how best to convey that publicly, because on first look, on first thinking, it can seem quite reasonable to assume that these injuries may have been sustained whilst seeing friends. That isn't how it pans out. This is telling me my internet connection is unstable. I apologise, I'm not sure if this is coming through, but I don't know if does that answer your question, Councillor Rees?
Well, can I just interrupt you, Sean? I think the Chief probably also wants to make a contribution.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question, Dylan, because as Sean says, it is a question, the answer to which actually goes right to the heart of almost everything that we do. So the task group report that Sean was referring to, although none of us would like to admit it who were around, was actually nearly 15 years ago. And so that's some considerable time, but it was a major piece of work, a very significant piece of work, which analysed our response to over 40 deaths of individuals from fire in North Wales. And that analysis, amongst many things, because it set the path for the way that we currently not just structure our operational response, but perhaps more significantly, our fire safety response. The reason why we do so much fire safety is for the very reason that Sean was outlining. In the 40 odd deaths that we analysed, we were unable, I think there was perhaps one where there may have been a question, but it certainly wasn't anything significant, a question as to whether or not, if our response time had been quicker, would the individual have survived. In all the others, the individual, our response didn't make a difference to the fatal outcome. Now, clearly, for people who are in a position where they can survive, then our response needs to be as quick as possible, because we actually could be the difference. Those people who die in fires, generally speaking, not only does our response not make a difference to the outcome, but generally speaking, people who die in fire are almost always dead before we even get the first emergency call. So that's the reason why we concentrate so much on fire safety, because the best way to keep safe in a property is to have good practices, good behaviours, and to concentrate as an individual on your own safety, not to rely on the fire and rescue service to rescue you. So good behaviours will almost certainly result in good outcomes. And as I say, our operational response is always to send the nearest fire appliance, and we can do that wherever those fire appliances are located. As I said, we respond in the quickest possible manner. But Sean is absolutely correct that the idea that there's a correlation between the speed of our response and the number of fatalities that we have is something that's still not proven.
Okay.
I hope that's helpful.
Happy, Dylan?
Yes, I'm not saying that there is a correlation, but I think the whole point is about speed of response. And I find it a little bit strange that when we're discussing the performance we report that we as authority members don't get any information or data about speed of response. I think that's the point I would like to make, but thank you for those answers.
Okay. Sean, I'm not quite sure whether in your presenting this report, your speech was actually coming across the translation. So I'm not quite sure whether you've selected French in terms of the interpretation, but it may well just be one of those IT issues. So next speaker is Mary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you all. Thank you, Sian, for that very comprehensive report. It was coming through fine. I know that I'm fairly close, but it was cutting up a little bit. So I think it's the electronic connection. Can I propose, Mr. Chair, that we accept the report and note the content? I'll second that.
Thank you for that, Chair. John, did you want to raise?
I'll second Merrick's proposal.
Thank you very much. Okay, all in favour of noting the report? Thank you. Now move on to item 8. I'm now going to ask Stuart if he'll present his report on the Firefighter Future Leader Apprenticeship. Stuart.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. So I'd like to talk to you this morning in relation to the Firefighter Future Leaders programme. But before I do that, I suppose I'd like to sort of set the scene in relation to why we need to run that programme, and then I'll go on to give some more detail about the programme itself. So start off at the starting position. Whenever we are looking to appoint people and promote people within our organisation, our starting position would always want to be that we would fill every vacant post from that process, because we have suitable and sufficient numbers of candidates, and we have candidates of the appropriate quality and delivering the appropriate evidence of their abilities. In recent years, that hasn't always been the case, and we have seen over recent years a reduction in numbers of people who are putting themselves forward for promotional processes, engaging in the entry qualifications that are required, that they are technical test and an assessment and development centre parts of the process. And that has led to a reduction in numbers of candidates that we can choose from. In addition to that, we have seen when people are attending for interview, we're seeing that they're not always able to demonstrate the qualities required to be appointed into permanent positions. And what I must say is that this is by no means a universal issue. We have very many well qualified and good candidates who are presenting themselves very well on interview. But there are occasions where people's performance on interview is not at the standard that we would expect to be able to appoint people permanently. And so in response to those two issues, I think that we needed to look at our approach to recruitment and promotional processes in two ways. The first way being to look at our internal candidates and do what we can to nurture those talents, to address some of the issues of concern within our existing workforce. And they include many activities such as debrief following process, full debrief where people are given ideas and pointers about how they can improve their performance on the next occasion, but also to provide more opportunities for people to demonstrate their performance at technical test and at ADC. So the ADC being the Assessment and Development Centre, giving people more opportunities each year to come back and put into practice the feedback that they've received, and running workshop type events to enable people to prepare themselves to give the best performance that they can on interview. So they're just a sort of snapshot of a couple of the things that we've done internally to nurture talent, as well as identifying people who have demonstrated potential and working with those around their bespoke areas of development. So a sort of a multifaceted approach to nurturing talent within our existing workforce. But also we need to look to growing the numbers of people who are making progress through our promotional processes, and identifying people who start with us who have an increased likelihood of making those movements, because our processes allow people to choose whether they make progress. And the concept of future leaders apprentices was one of identifying people who have those talents at the start of their career, and that we can work with to prepare them for progression from the start of their career. And this is where we've led to future leaders apprentices. Future leaders apprentices are building upon the successes that we've experienced with our previous apprentice cohorts, and members will recall that we have had firefighter apprentices in place for some time, and these firefighter apprentices have progressed through their apprenticeship program, some of which are progressing into supervisory manager positions. But the concept of future leaders program is more about making some of those requirements that we have, the entry-level requirements for qualification and the skills and attributes that are required from a potential manager, making some of those things front-ended and making them a contractual requirement for people to progress. So the Future Leaders Apprenticeship recruitment program began in 2020, and there was a large number of applicants who applied from across North Wales. The process involved an application process where we were requesting people to demonstrate certain prerequisite qualifications to attend for future leaders, as a previous academic achievement is an indicator of the ability to keep up with the level of development required from this program. And so the entry-level qualifications were at a higher level than our previous apprenticeship programs. Prior to opening up recruitment, we undertook a number of positive action events. They included attendance at things like parkrun events, where we encouraged people from a diverse set of backgrounds to be involved in the recruitment process. We also had taster days at fire stations, giving people an opportunity to experience the types of tests that may be run on the actual day of selection. We even, on this occasion for the first time, held fitness sessions for people who were able to engage for an initial test of their fitness, and then be given a bespoke fitness program to then be revisited 8 weeks later to measure their performance in relation to fitness. Obviously an element where certain groups have fallen down in previous campaigns. And after a successful multi-stage recruitment campaign, we were able to recruit a very diverse set of candidates who will be engaged in a program that will last 3 years, that will focus in its early weeks on the initial requirements of a firefighter, an 11-week training course, where following which they will begin their portfolio of development towards achieving the firefighter apprenticeship, but simultaneously will be exposed to a number of management and leadership qualifications, health and safety qualifications, and a contractual requirement for them to engage in technical test preparations and ultimately in assessment and development centres. These elements are, as I say, now contractual requirements for future leader apprentices. In addition, Welsh language skills are prevalent in the contract of employment, with the candidates being required to achieve level 2 Welsh within their period of probation, and level 3 Welsh by the end of the 3-year programme. The teams will also, or the candidates will also be exposed to not only firefighting roles, but also in support department roles all over the service, and be given opportunities to have a well-rounded view of the organisation by spending time in development roles within many of our support functions, including fire safety, including training, operations, corporate communications, HR, as well some of our support functions also. So at the end of that 3-year programme, we have a group of well-qualified officers who have had experiences that give them a well-rounded view of the organisation, to put them in the best possible position to compete for appointments and progression into supervisory manager positions, and shortly after with continued support and development into middle manager positions. As I say, this is one of a suite of measures that we have deployed over the last couple of years to both nurture internal talent and to identify talent from outside of the service who have the potential to progress into supervisory and middle manager positions. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Stuart. And I think members will recognise that officers nowadays, their skill set has changed because of the need both to address politically as well as via communication, which is not a skill that perhaps comes easy to everybody. So I think this proposed twin track approach going forward is to be welcomed. But I've got a number of speakers that want to speak first. Mary?
Diolch eto, Cadeirydd, a diolch I Stuart am yr adroddiad.
Thank you once again, Chair, and thank you, Stuart, for the report. It's a concern, isn't it, for us as members that we're unable to find suitable applicants? That is a problem. Is it possible for us to improve that by presenting the problems to the education department of the local authorities? If that is the problem, that the education background isn't strong enough, or are you just looking for university candidates who've shown that they are able to progress educationally at least, if nothing else? So that's my question. Thank you.
Stuart?
Okay, so in relation to the candidates' abilities, I don't suggest for 1 minute that it's beyond their capabilities to compete for these jobs successfully. I think that we have a group of staff who are very able to apply themselves, and there's been a question of them wanting to do some of those things. So individuals' quality, work-life balance and people's home situation comes to play whether or not they want to put themselves forward for processes at any point in their life, if they have young children, if they live out of area, and all of those things where people may not want to put themselves forward for progression. And we've been working with our teams to try to encourage and inform of the benefits of career progression so that they are putting themselves forward. I think we can do more to support those people who are engaged in our processes, and that work has also begun, as I've mentioned, as part of the nurturing of talent internally, with a number of bespoke training activities and development activities that have been targeted towards individuals who are engaging in those processes, as well as trying to encourage more people to be involved in the processes also. And so over the last 2 years, there's been a number of programs run, high potential candidates, masterclass type activity, where we have identified particular areas of weakness that we've focused upon developing our workforce in. So there's a multifaceted approach. I don't think that it's the ability in terms of academic ability of the individuals. I think there's a multifaceted response to the problem, of which many of which we've already deployed. In terms of your second part of your question around graduates, as I said in the paper, the best indicator of ability to keep up with the pace of the required development here is the fact that people have applied themselves in the past and have achieved a higher level of qualification. The actual level of qualification was A-levels rather than graduates. So people who had, progressed from GCSE level into A-levels. And this was simply as an indicator of people's ability to keep up with the pace of development rather than the content, because of the fact that, we're looking at moving people through more quickly than ever before.
Thank you, Stuart. Can I ask the Chief, what's the comment on Mary's question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was going to pick up the issue around education qualifications, but I think Stuart has actually answered that quite comprehensively. Whilst the paper, I think, focuses on some quite specific issues, I think what's important here is to take an organisational picture. At the moment, and for the foreseeable future, we have a supply and demand issue. So we have a demand for appointments. People are leaving the service quite regularly, as you know. I've briefed members before on issues around the pension scheme and the impact that changes to the pension scheme are having and things like that. So we're seeing a number of people leaving the service. And in an ideal world, we would like to have far more people qualified for those vacancies and able to meet the standard than we've got number of vacancies. But at the moment, the opposite is true. So what the Future Leaders programme is trying to do, and it is taking a long-term view, because as Stuart has said, it will be a minimum of 3 years before we start to see any kind of impact from the programme. But what we're trying to do is take a long-term view and to put more people into the organisation with a particular approach and some bespoke training and development for them in order, and it is, it's by no means certain, but in order that we have a better chance that at the appropriate time, there will be people who will engage with the process and be able to meet the standard. And as Stuart has said, at the moment, it's not to say that we don't have people who can do that at the moment, we just don't have enough of them. And so this is just one of a range of measures that we're introducing to try and improve our chances of being able to fill our leadership posts in the future from within the resources that we've got within the service.
Okay. Mary, did you want to come back?
Dim ond yn sydyn iawn. Derbyn yr adroddiad sydd wedi cael ei roi gyn y ddau swyddog.
Just very quickly, Chair. I accept the report presented by the two officers and thank you to them. I was trying to go more towards the young people who leave schools and want to come into the fire service. That's what I was trying to find out. Is there a weakness there that they are not up to standard to start as a fire officer and then work their way up?
Okay, thank you for proposing the report. I'll go now. Anthony, got a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. It's just it is alarming what just touching on what Merrick said. It's what are the authorities' feelings on the success or failings of the scheme in the early stages now? The concept as it is, like you said, the numbers dropping, the recruitment is low. The selection criteria, the timescale, can't it be revised so quickly so that it can be readjusted? And the effect that it's having on the morale of staff, where when they're in temporary positions, it has a negative effect on the overall, sort of well-being of groups. If I could have an answer to those initially, please.
Okay, I'll bring the Chief in on that, please.
Yeah, if I've understood Rondo correctly, that I suppose my response would be, first of all, that there is no problem whatsoever with the supply of potential recruits into the service at firefighter level. We don't have a problem with that at all. We are always oversubscribed whenever we advertise for those. The entry standards, which are national entry standards, don't actually specify any educational attainment at all. The entry standards basically relate to physical and other attributes. So there is no cut-off point in terms of educational attainment by which people can come into the service. Now, we are in reality, if not in theory, a single tier entry service. In other words, we generate our future leaders from within our operational workforce, and they go from the bottom to the top. And I would be a fairly stereotypical example of someone who has done that. But as the point was made earlier on, the requirements of leadership in the modern era are becoming ever more complex, and they require a wider range of skills. And I think it's important that not only the authority members understand the complexity of it, but I think also our workforce needs to understand the complexity of it. And so the benchmark, if you like, the standard for future development gets higher and higher. And it's important that people recognize that and that they put work in to achieve that standard. Now, as I said in answer to the previous question, at the moment we have a workforce, many of whom are working hard in order to gain promotion. And as Stuart has already pointed out, this is not to say that we won't continue to look to that group of people for the bulk of our future leaders. What the Future Leaders Programme is intending to do is to try and increase the chances of being able to select from that group in the future. And at the moment, as I've already made the point, the demand is outstripping the supply. I regularly hold, in fact, the last round that we held for each leadership level, on most occasions, we were unable to appoint to all the vacancies that we had. So we've got a growing backlog of vacancies for which we don't have at the moment people who have been able to come through and demonstrate that standard in sufficient quantity.
Okay, Rhonda, are you happy?
Can I just come back and say thank you for that, Simon? But is the failings then in the development centre? Because obviously you've recruited the staff at entry level, and then basically, it's like as if we're trying to reinvent the wheel, because like you emphasised with yourself, you sort of start at the bottom and then you show you apply yourself and you show the abilities to progress, and that's how it used to be. But don't you think that we're overcomplicating things, and that maybe the problems in the development centre, and literally moving forward, what is the authority going to do to fill these positions, and how they're going to fill these positions if the quality of the candidates coming through isn't good enough?
When you say the development centre, you mean within the training and development programme that
yes,
undergo when they come in? Well, you have to excuse me, I've got a really dry throat, I do apologise. The ongoing training that firefighters undertake is primarily based around their competence at that level, so maintaining the competence for the role in which they're operating. Future development opportunities are there. Stuart's already identified to you what those opportunities are. When someone comes in for promotion and they're unsuccessful, then they can be given a plan for development. So we identify those areas where they've been unsuccessful. They're then given a plan for development. And then that plan is monitored for successful completion. So I don't think that there's a deficiency in the opportunities and the training and development that's available to firefighters currently within the service. We can always improve that, but I don't think that's the root point of the deficiency. Some of the issues that affect people's willingness to engage with promotion are domestic and around their personal lives as well. So some people are unwilling to enter into a process where they feel they may, if they're successful, they may be posted to somewhere that doesn't suit them domestically. So there are a range of issues that we're trying to tackle here. And as I said, the future leaders, whilst we're proud of it and we want to advise you of what's going on, it isn't, we aren't portraying this as the final answer or the major solution to it. It's just trying to increase the pool of people some way down the line for promotion, because we're coming up against a bit of a barrier at the moment, because we're just not getting people engaging with the process in sufficient numbers, and those who do aren't meeting the standard in sufficient numbers to take us forward.
Just a quick question. What's the percentage of passes that you get in the applications for progressing further in the authority out of the initial applications?
I don't have that information to hand, I'm sorry, Rondo, but I can certainly let you have that. It's something that we're working on at the moment. So we'll have that information very readily for you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Roger?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I think the Chief has answered this, but I'll go and ask it anyhow. Yeah, the fire service, they don't just have fires these days. So consequently, I understand that there's other stuff that you do, and that's increasing. So with the increase of the other stuff that you do you take that into account when you're interviewing for leaders?
Who's the question?
You need to answer that.
Yes.
Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah, when we do selection processes, then candidates are tested across a whole range of skills. It's not just an information issue. It's not just confined to one particular aspect of firefighting or one particular aspect of a fire officer's role. They're expected to display some level of skill across a whole range of issues, and as you quite rightly identify, those can and do include what would be broadly called corporate issues.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and Anne, you've got a question. Can you unmute?
Diolch yn fawr, Mr. Cadeirydd. Could I ask what the percentage of firefighters leaving the fire authority because they possibly cannot get promotion? And I'm not clear on the answer to staff morale here as well. Diolch yn fawr.
I don't think we keep information regarding that we could express as a percentage regarding the number of people who leave because they can't get promotion. We do conduct exit interviews with everybody who leaves the service, and those exit interviews are analysed by our HR staff. I come across a significant percentage of those in person. And I'd have to say, I can't recollect one where an individual has left the service because they're frustrated in their promotion ambitions.
Okay.
The question of staff morale, I think, has been brought up twice. I'm not quite sure what the origin of this question is. The primary purpose You know, the primary purpose of putting people into leadership positions with sufficient levels of skill and qualifications is to ensure that we conduct our operations safely and professionally, and we have a standard which we will not deviate from and that people have to meet. And so I'm not quite sure why this should have an effect on staff morale. People understand what the standard is and should work towards it. I would have thought that staff morale would have been improved at the prospect of only having people with who've been successful through this process in charge of them. But as I say, I'm not entirely sure what the basis of that question is.
Do you want to come back, Anne?
Yeah, I would ask, do you speak to the staff on a one-to-one level and ask how they feel, their personal feelings? I mean, it must affect their work. I'm a little bit confused at different answers to the question here. It's mentioned about the recruitment program and people not being up to standard. I mean, if they've worked with the fire authority, do you look at the achievements of work over the years? I mean, not everybody, fair play, comes over very good in interviews, but doesn't mean to say they're not capable in a lot of the work. I'm just concerned really about how the staff do feel. It is bound to have an effect on them if they try for a higher position and they don't get it.
The answer to your question, do we interact with them? Anybody who comes for any selection process at whatever level is debriefed afterwards by a member of the panel that's interviewed them. I personally chair every operational selection panel through the service, from crew manager all the way up to area manager. I undertake a number of those debriefs myself, particularly if I feel that individuals have got specific issues that they need to address. And that includes debriefing successful candidates as well. So we don't assume that just because somebody's been successful that they don't have development needs. So in terms of individuals having access to senior managers, the people who are making decisions about them, then that access, I think, is actually very good. And I think that process has worked well over the years and is evidenced by the number of people who've taken some of those issues on board and come back and been successful at a later time.
Okay. I've got no other questions for you, Stuart. I have had a proposer. I need somebody to second it to note the report. But I would point out that this is going to be a twin track approach going forward, and it's going to be 3 years down the road before we're able to analyse the success of it. But I think, it's been pointed out in this paper, it's an avenue that we need to pursue. So I could invite somebody to second and note the report, please. Thank you, Roger. We're all in favour of accepting it? Thank you. Now we move on to item 9, Local Government and Elections, Wales Act 2021. Sian, are you taking this one?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise you of the introduction of the new Act of Senedd Cymru that received royal assent just last month. I'm sure you will have already come across this piece of legislation, the Local Government and Elections Wales Act 2021, in your county councils as well. But of course, how it affects a fire and rescue authority is different from how it affects a county council or indeed many of the other bodies that it captures. As outlined in paragraphs 4 to 6 in the background section, this new act covers a lot of different aspects. One of the aspects that's had most publicity probably is the extension of votes to 16 to 18-year-olds in Wales. But obviously there's a lot more to it than that. For one thing, it extends the electoral cycle for councils to 5 years. So members may in future be on the Fire Authority for 5 years instead of 4, which will obviously affect the planning cycle for the Fire and Rescue Authority and its work. The Act itself is quite a complex read, to put it mildly, not least because the Fire and Rescue Authorities are sometimes caught within the definition of a local authority and sometimes not. So it takes a bit of unpicking to understand which parts actually apply to a Fire and Rescue Authority. There are other parts too where they do apply to Fire and Rescue Authorities, but they won't come into effect in practical terms until the Welsh ministers have put separate regulations into place or guidance. It will take quite a lot of work and indeed some legal training probably to spot all the changes that are going to be necessary to implement this Act, to reflect it into things like the Constitution and standing orders, as well as to policies and procedures. So, well, I for one will be looking to the clerk for some assistance on this, and I think that you know, we together between officers and the clerk's office, then we can get that. Should be able to get the impact assessment done fairly soon. I've tried to give a summary of some of the changes that we can look forward to in paragraph 8. So the first one there is performance and governance. That's in section 167 of the new Act. Unlike the performance and governance arrangements for county councils, which they'll change quite significantly from what I understand into more self-assessment and peer review arrangements. But for FRAs, Fire and Rescue Authorities, will be subject to a performance regime and arrangements that will be more tailored to Fire and Rescue Authorities. The Local Government Measure 2009 always did feel a bit too complex for a Fire and Rescue Authority. So we don't know exactly how the new arrangements will look, but we do know that there'll be much closer alignment with the Welsh Government's published Fire and Rescue National Framework for Wales. So I think once beyond the May elections, we'll get a bit more detail on that, what the framework, the next framework will contain and what the performance regime will entail. As I said, the introduction of the Act has had the effect of repealing the Local Government Measure 2009. So as we are today, the authority is no longer a Welsh Improvement Authority. It no longer has to set itself and annually review improvement objectives, which it's been doing for a good few years now. But of course, it still has to comply with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So it has to set itself long-term wellbeing objectives. And for the next few months, we need to get over this transitionary period when we have the residue of the legacy of our improvement objectives under the local government measure. And as we transition into the new regime, we just have to bear in mind, we'll still have to look back over performance in this current financial year and report against it as though we were still subject to the local government measure. So a bit of an awkward transition. It affects Audit Wales, the Auditor General too. So they've indicated that they will incorporate that work of auditing the work that we did under the old regime, the previous regime, within their work going forward. In terms of the Combined Fire and Rescue Authorities Inquiries section, so that's section 166 of the new Act, this was something that all 3 fire and rescue authorities in Wales were unhappy with during the period while the Act was still a bill. And we did make our objections known, but obviously fell on deaf ears somewhat. So whereas in England, under the Fire and Rescue Services Act, a public inquiry would have to be held if the government wanted to change any element of the combination scheme order that establishes the Fire and Rescue Authority and the Fire and Rescue Service for the respective area, except for certain circumstances. But in Wales, the Welsh ministers will not now have to hold such an inquiry, except if they are proposing to revoke the authority's combination scheme in its entirety, or if there's going to be a change to the geographical area of the FRA. So there's no longer a requirement to hold such an inquiry in those circumstances. Section 46 of the Act relates to electronic broadcasting of local authority meetings. And you will be aware of how this applies in your county councils. But it doesn't apply in the same way to FRAs, but it could do if the Welsh ministers make regulations to that effect. So as it stands today, it doesn't, but it could do. So giving just one example there of where the Act has a sort of, you have to interpret special parts of it. Section 47 relates to holding and attending virtual meetings of the Fire and Rescue Authority. That's just one aspect that I suggest does need to be reflected in standing orders and the Constitution and such like, to make it clear what attending means. And obviously these have been written with a previous regime with the assumption that attending means attending a location in person. And then finally, as described in paragraph 9 of the report, there are a few parts of the Act that actually I don't think we'll know how they'll pan out in practice until we see how it pans out in practice. So the example that I've given there is with the new corporate joint committees, the CJCs, which members will be familiar with or will at least have heard about in their councils. These don't apply to FRAs directly, only to county or county borough councils, but CJCs will be required to consult with public services boards at various stages. And as you're aware, public services boards comprise 4 equal statutory partners, namely the County Council, the Fire and Rescue Authority, the Health Board and Natural Resources Wales. So what difference that consultation will make in practice, how that will affect any decisions of the CJC or proposals, remains to be seen. So I think as you know, in the next few years, I think we'll get clearer as to how it pans out. But as we stand today, it's probably somewhat unclear. And therefore, as stated in paragraph 10, Chair, the next steps involve understanding what needs to be changed, what needs writing into the Constitution and so on, and also for the service to review its own policies and procedures in light of this new Act. There will need to be more reports to follow on this for members to consider, but until the detail has been worked through, Chair, the recommendation for today is that members note the contents. Diolch yn fawr.
Well, thank you, Sian, for walking us through that minefield. I think members will remember that when Welsh Government were looking at the future governance of FRAs, if you like, the one safeguard we had was the fact that they had to hold a public inquiry if they wished to change the combination orders. And in a stroke, they've removed that section out. And I think you're quite right in highlighting the CJCs. It's another tier of bureaucracy, and by all accounts, we'll have to live with it and work with it. But again, I think that's for another day. I haven't got anybody with a hand up to ask Sian any questions. I suspect they're either overcome by her knowledge, or they've had a fill of it at council level. But lo and behold, Mary has a question.
Well, diolch dyd y gwir I Sian. O ddarllen yr adroddiad.
I would like to say thank you to Sian. Having read the report, it's one of the most complex things you can read. So I will also propose that we accept the report.
Thank you, Mary. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Dylan. We all in favour? Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Continue with your homework.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, we'll now move on to item 10, and this is the safe and well checks. Richard, I think you're going to take this for us.
Yes, diolch yn fawr, Chair. Bore da pawb, good morning, everyone. The purpose of this paper is to advise members of the impact the restrictions due to COVID-19 have had on the number of safe and well checks the service has been able to carry out this year, and the effect that that will have on the Fire Authority's annual target. In background, following the Chief Officer's Task Group report in 2007, which has been spoken about earlier, the Fire Authority adopted an annual target of 30,000 home safety checks. The reason it was 30,000 is that with approximately 300,000 properties in North Wales, it would be a 10-year programme with the aim for us to get to every single domestic dwelling in North Wales to carry out a home fire safety check, which then later became a safe and well check. And one of the reasons for this is, as has already been described, when we analysed every death in North Wales over that period, the only way to save those people was to get to them before the fire started. And that shows the importance and our continued importance of us carrying out home safety checks, getting into people's houses and making sure that they have working smoke detectors. So if the worst happens and a fire does start, they can be alerted and get out. We've been supported by capital funding from the Welsh Government to purchase fire safety interventions since 2007. And those included the single point smoke detectors. There's been a reduction in that funding, and in 2015, the Fire Authority reduced the annual target from 30,000 to 20,000. But of course, COVID restrictions started last March. And with the introduction of the first lockdown, the service reviewed our provision of the safe and well check to the public of North Wales in order to comply with the restrictions, but also to keep the staff who carried out these checks and the people they carried them out with as safe as we possibly could. So we stopped face-to-face safe and well checks. We looked at how we could deliver them, and we started to use the telephone to contact people and carry out a safe and well check over the phone, utilising the staff who usually carried out this service face-to-face. Some of those staff we also deployed into other areas of service to support the service's continued work during these unprecedented times. If on those phone calls, people were identified of not having a working smoke detector, then arrangements were made for those people to have them, whether it be dropped off on their doorstep with instructions how to fit, or whether it be posted to them, again, with instructions how to fit. In August 2020, when lockdown and restrictions started to be eased, the service, with some strict risk assessments, started to carry out some face-to-face safe and well checks with the most vulnerable in our communities, the people who we and our partners identified as being most at risk of fire. Paragraph 12 of the report actually gives the total number of safe and well checks that has been carried out up until the 31st of January 2021, which identifies 9,919. 2,229 of these were carried out in person, and the remaining 7,690 over the telephone. It's reassuring to note that 33% of those carried out were referred by our partner agencies to make sure that we're getting those most vulnerable people the service that they need. These figures mean that we're not going to make the 20,000 fire and rescue authority's target this year, and we're unable to predict what restrictions will happen and how long they'll continue. And this means that we won't fully know when we're able to carry on or continue with face-to-face safe and well checks for all our checks. So members need to be aware that it's possible that the 20,000 target for 2021 and 22 will also be challenging for us to meet. Members do need to be assured, however, that the service continue to review how we're delivering these safe and well checks and will continue through the restrictions. But we do focus our efforts on those people at highest risk of dying in an accidental dwelling fire. And we continue to work with our partners to identify those people in our communities. So I'd like members to note the possible shortfall in the safe and well checks carried out this year, and the fact that we won't make the 20,000 target, and also that the potential for COVID restrictions to impact on the service's ability to meet the 2021-22 20,000 target. Happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Richard. As I said earlier, in respect of the report that Sean made, I think, to be honest, you should be commended for actually achieving nearly a 50% target when you've had to contend with the COVID restrictions. So those that have been doing it, I hope you'll pass on our thanks for that. But also in the report has highlighted those 47 properties that hadn't got a smoke detector. It just illustrates too the work that's still to be done. And I think it's encouraging that we have that feedback from partner organisations which are helping us to achieve it. And at the end of the day, there are potentially 9,000 properties now that are safer than they were 12 months ago. So, members, any questions other than noting the report? I don't see anybody. Roger?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question is, considering the aging population, people are getting older, does that have a bearing on checks? Or will it do in the future?
One of the contributory factors that we identified in the task group report was age. So the older the individual was, the more at risk they were. As the population does age, clearly it'll have an impact on the number of older people in our communities, which just makes it more important for us to be able to get referrals from partner agencies for people who are, when they start to get older, start to have other issues, but also to maintain the continual supply of home fire safety checks to people of all ages across North Wales. But we do concentrate on the people who are older because they fall into that higher vulnerable risk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, can I have a proposer? We note the report. Thank you, Michael. Seconder. Thank you, John. All in favour? Thank you. I think you're taking the next item, Richard, the post-transition Brexit.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Diolch yn fawr. This is just a verbal report, and it follows on from the written report that was submitted to the authority in November last year. The background to Brexit, and I'm sure we'll all remember, it's almost 4.5 years ago now. On 23rd of June 2016, the outcome of a referendum was that the UK would leave the EU. In March 2017, the UK invoked Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union, and that triggered the UK's withdrawal from Europe, and that's what was commonly known as Brexit. This changed on January the 31st last year, when the UK entered a transition period, and we finally left the European Union on the 31st of December 2020. During this process, it's been regularly reported to the service, to the members, sorry, that the service has been working to identify, plan and mitigate any impacts the withdrawal from the European Union may cause us, whether that be communicating with staff to ensure that all the staff knew the impact that might happen to them, looking at issues with regard to supply chain, and also considering the effect of the uncertain financial strain that might follow transition. Through this period, we also worked with the local resilience forum and attended the strategic coordination group in North Wales, initially under Yellowhammer, which was the government project, and latterly under D20, which was the risk identified by the government through transition. And our main focus of that work was to work with partners to support the community across North Wales, but also focus on working to mitigate the risks, particularly due to the fact that there was potentially going to be issues in the port of Holyhead. And we worked alongside partners to ensure that any disruption in Holyhead caused the minimum amount of disruption for the fire and rescue service. The strategic coordination group that oversaw that stood down in late January as the disruption in North Wales has been kept to a minimum, although there is still a long-term concern over the long-term effect that the use of the port in Holyhead might have on the economy across North Wales. Pleased to say that the work that we carried out within the service and with the SCG has ensured that we've been able to continue to deliver all our services, and that although we haven't seen any disruption to those services of delivering both our preventative agenda and our operational service, we had been prepared, and we'd prepared business continuity plans, which thankfully we weren't in a position where we had to use. So, as I said, the Brexit SCG has been stood down, but we'll continue to monitor any of the issues that might arise from the UK leaving the European Union.
Okay, can I thank you, Richard, for that, and hope Brexit is a thing of the past. Roger, you've got a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry about this, Chair, again. My question is, can you expand in respect of what you mean by the supply chain, please?
Yeah, as with lots of organisations, some of our supplies, such as vehicle supplies, breathing apparatus, potentially came from areas within the European Union. So we had to ensure that those suppliers had proper business continuity measures in place to ensure that there wasn't any disruption, or as little disruption as possible, to us receiving those goods. So it was identifying where we got things from, what measures were in place if there was going to be an issue with them coming into the UK, and that's the supply chain work that we carried out.
And yet there's no risk at all?
We've worked with all our suppliers to mitigate the risk as far as possible. Clearly, there might be some things that are coming in from the continent that will take a little bit longer. But one of the things we did was all the people who use those sort of equipment, so the fleet department, have had a stockpile of a certain amount of those things to ensure that if there was a delay, then it wouldn't impact on our ability to carry out the fleet function.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that update, Richard. Before I ask somebody to move that we actually go into part two, can I thank all the officers for their presentations today? Right, can I ask somebody to actually move that we go into part two?
Cynnig, Meirig and cynnig.
Can I ask those officers now if they would leave
Proposed by Councillor
the
Mary
meeting,
Davies,
as the item is in connection with the Chief Fire Officer recruitment.
Chair, if it's helpful, I'll just specify the officers who need to leave.
Yes.
So Stuart Millington, Tracy Williams, Helen MacArthur, Sean Morris, Louisa Phillips, Pam Bass and Diane Davis.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, that would appear as though...
Oh, sorry, Chair, Louisa Phillips hasn't left yet. I take it Al